Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar. Today, I am Dr. Nguyen. Just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I am the clinical director and a clinical psychologist for Desert Recovery Centers. And today we're going to cover how does alcohol affect mental health, right? And I think this is such an important topic because alcohol is something used socially, but it's something often used by many people, right? For dinner, for drinks. And it's really important to kind of discuss how and when that becomes an issue and how it can affect your mental health. Okay. Um, and there's going to be a few different things that we're going to discuss, but it's also if anybody has any questions about, how alcohol or when do we know that it becomes a problem, that's something that we can discuss at the end. But overall, even if individuals, and a lot of people ask me this, like if they don't have a diagnosis per se or a mental illness that has been identified, alcohol can still affect your mental health as a whole, right? Even if you do or do not have a diagnosis. And here is why. So let's talk about alcohol and brain chemistry, right? So alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, right? So that what that means is that it slows down brain functioning. In turn, that really directly alters your brain chemistry. And a lot of times, people will probably all together, right? Say, hey, when I have a drink, I experience immediate relaxation, right? Immediate, I just feel better. It's like a breath of fresh air, right? So, in having that drink, that alcoholic beverage, it does help with relaxation. But actually, what's happening is it's suppressing brain activity, right? It's not truly regulating that your emotions, right? It's not a true emotional regulation, as we would say. So that relaxation that individuals might feel, it's due to brain activity being suppressed, right? And so how does that work is that there's several key neurotransmitters in the brain. So number one is dopamine. People have heard about this often. Dopamine. What is that? Dopamine is something that kind of signals your body for pleasure. Something's pleasurable or is a reward, right? And so when you drink alcohol, it increases dopamine and it creates a temporary feeling of like pleasure, reward. And then when you keep drinking or keep using alcohol, the brain will naturally produce less dopamine, right? Because now the brain is saying, hey, this is going to give me dopamine, right? And unfortunately, over time, if your brain is now creating less dopamine and it's relying on alcohol, there's going to be normal activities, the hobbies, things that you like to do, social connection, getting out, even exercising. It's going to feel less satisfying over time, right? And so, because now the brain is decreasing that, your body's natural ability to feel pleasure, it can even lead to low motivation and just decreased enjoyment in everyday life, right? Now the brain is constantly seeking that dopamine hit, that quick result of alcohol, which gives you that increase in dopamine, right? And that's how an addiction can start. Or you relying on alcohol to feel a certain way. You'll be compelled to drink again just to feel normal, right? And that normal is the dopamine, the increase in that dopamine, right? And that kind of is the cycle of addiction. You want to drink so that you can feel normal. Um, so really, in short, alcohol just hijacks your brain reward system. Um, and so you'll eventually need more and more just to feel okay. So GABA, right? GABA is what kind of helps. It's your brain's primary calming chemical, right? It can help you just feel more relaxed. So when we're drinking, it will also enhance GABA, right? And it can make it where your brain activity slows down, a little bit more sedating, those relaxing effects. And again, with repeated use, your brain becomes less effective at calming itself naturally. And then that increases your baseline in anxiety when alcohol is not present, right? So if your body feels calmer when it's kind of submersed or has that sprinkling of alcohol, that will be the baseline for your anxiety. And so when the alcohol is not present, in the morning or before dinner, or you haven't really gotten that drink yet, your anxiety will be increased. Um, so glutamate, it reduces alertness and cognitive functioning, right? And so that's what glutamate is responsible for, is for you to be alert and kind of be able to make good decisions, cognitive functioning, right? That's what you think of. That's why drinking and driving, you should not be drinking and driving because your cognitive functioning and your alertness is way down, right? So it leads to slow thinking, impaired judgment, difficulties with memory and concentration. And then alcohol also disrupts your serotonin, right? Your serotonin plays a major role in sleep, a major role in your mood, your emotional stability. And so this disruption is one of the reasons alcohol is so closely linked to depression, mood swings, and sleep disturbances. And we're going to talk more about that, but a lot of times people will think that alcohol helps them sleep better. But again, we're going to talk about that. And so overall, in short, alcohol does provide, right, this short-term relief, right? But it's temporary. And then the consequences, the what's followed with, is rebound in symptoms, which is increased anxiety, irritability, and low mood. Um, and then, of course, over time, repeated alcohol use to kind of help with that, like to help escape the depression, to help escape any anxiety or sadness, to lower our inhibitions. If you continually do that, that can create the cycle, right? The cycle, which like will definitely increase the likelihood of dependence and emotional instability, right? Worsening those mental health symptoms. And so really what's really important to remember is, I'm very honest with people when we're talking about alcohol use or drug use. Yes, alcohol makes you feel relaxed. Yes, alcohol can make you, feel a little bit better, a little happier in that moment. But really just remember that it is altering your brain chemistry, right? And so that over time will make issues worse. Okay, so alcohol and depression. Let's see here. Let me move this. I'm sorry. Alcohol and depression, they frequently occur together, right? And the thing with it is that because they can commonly occur together, uh, each can worsen, right, or the other over time. So alcohol can exacerbate depression. Depression can exacerbate alcohol use. It's this cycle that keeps going, and they're like best friends. They go together, right? We're gonna stick together. We're gonna go through this together. And the reason why is many times people drink, right, when we're feeling sad, when we're feeling down, depressed, and it's a way, right, to cope, to temporarily escape those emotions. Unfortunately, alcohol can definitely significantly worsen low mood and increase the feelings of hopelessness, even if it feels like it provides the relief initially, right? And I already touched on that before, and I'm probably going to say it over and over again because a lot of times people will say that in the beginning, I need that. It makes me feel a little bit happier. It just helped my mood. It helped me relax, right? So that initial relief really does cause eventually your mood to keep getting worse, your feelings of hopelessness. And on top of that, it really makes for your brain's ability to regulate its emotions on its own, right? It makes it harder to manage stress, harder to manage sadness, any of those negative thoughts that are coming in. It's a crutch right now when those are coming. I feel like I can only manage that if I have a drink. I feel like when I'm so stressed out, when I'm really sad or something horrific happens in my life, or maybe just the daily life is overwhelming because it can be, right? These negative thoughts about how I'm not worth it, I can't do it, I can't manage it. And the instant relief of those thoughts, those feelings is grabbing that drink, right? It definitely feels like it's helping in the moment, but it's really making those thoughts and all that much, much worse. Alcohol interferes with healthy coping mechanisms, right? And that's really what I'm talking about is just instead of finding ways to deal with that, the healthier way, alcohol now is the way to kind of instantly relieve that, um, and knowing that that will increase the feelings of isolation and guilt, right? Especially after drinking, right? Once the alcohol wears off a little bit, or even during times of being drunk, or even during times of being intoxicated, right? It can really deepen those depressive symptoms. And really, if you think about it, alcohol is a depressant, right? Earlier, when I'm talking about the GABA and the glutamate and all that, it is really calming and bringing things down, right? And so when they say alcohol is a depressant, it will intensify depression rather than relieving it, right? And over time, again, that creates that harmful cycle where someone's drinking to cope with depression, to cope with the sadness and hopelessness or worthlessness. It's really just going to make that worse. That temporary escape is really just reinforcing it over time. Okay. So, and now alcohol and anxiety, right? Many people, of course, drink alcohol to cope with anxiety. It really, really works really well in the moment, right? It lowers inhibitions. It really makes you feel more relaxed in social settings, more confident, courageous, right? In the moment. When they talk about being less inhibited when you after you have a drink, that's really it. It could get you to get on stage and sing a song or do a karaoke song or, go talk to people that maybe you wouldn't really normally talk to. All those things. Or it might make a family party easier to get through, right? It might make a work meeting just a little bit better, right? That being more relaxed, having that increase in confidence, right? However, when alcohol leaves your system, right? Your anxiety will return stronger, right? Because the unfortunate thing is that in the moments of feeling more confident, courageous, and all those things, you may think, oh, my anxiety is under control, right? It's gone. I got this. I don't need, I can do that. I can get up on stage. I can speak, in front of 10, 20, 100 people. However, when it leaves, individuals, you will feel what everyone will report is feeling more on edge, right? More easily overwhelmed, less able to cope without alcohol, right? What will happen is it'll generally show up as an increase of restlessness, right? Just that I just am not comfortable. I got to get out of here, just kind of, it just prickly is just crawling inside my skin kind of a deal, right? And then irritability, right? We're a little bit shorter. We're not able to be as patient, racing thoughts, right? More negative thoughts. And then, of course, it can even lead to panic symptoms, right? So, a lot of times, the long term alcohol use can definitely contribute, right, to generalized anxiety, right? Now we're worrying about everything all day from the beginning of the day, from the moment I open up my eyes to the moment I lay my head down, I'm still thinking, my mind's racing. And that's kind of why alcohol is helpful, right? It can turn my brain off. It can help me go to sleep. It can help me not think and worry, right? But unfortunately, without the alcohol, when it's not there, the thoughts are just going to emerge stronger, more panic attacks, right? More restlessness, and things that maybe used to be stressful. Maybe let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 5. But now, because of the alcohol, what it's done, changed the brain chemistry, kind of done different things to our body, that same, let's say, stressful situation is no longer a 5. It's now going to present itself at an 8 or a 9 or a 10, right? And then that creates that cycle, right? That I need to have that drink, right? That to have that drink to cover up, to take away the irritability, take away the restlessness, give me that short term boost, right? For confidence, that short term boost so that I can be less anxious and do XYZ, or so that I can sleep, or that my brain will slow down, right? But the most important thing is it's a short term relief. It will ultimately worsen the anxiety, right? Okay. And now we're going to move more into, we talked about how it impacts depression, anxiety, and then, of course, sleep, and then overall emotional stability. Um, So a lot of people, and I think I already said this, right? Just touched on it just a little bit earlier, because when your brain and your anxiety is going and going, people will say, "Hey, I need a drink to fall asleep," right? It helps knock me out faster. I feel like I sleep better after I have a couple glasses of wine, or a bottle of wine or two, whatever it may be. But just in knowing that, to be fair, of course, alcohol does help you fall asleep more quickly, right? That's why people think it's helping. But what's actually happening is alcohol is sedating the brain, right? It's not creating a healthy, restorative sleep, right? It's just this, it really is disrupting your brain's natural sleep regulation. So just even going back, you can notice now there's that pattern. It is disrupting your brain's chemistry in so many different areas. Dopamine, GABA, and then your sleep regulation, right? And that relates to even the deeper stages of sleep, right? REM and all those different things that your body and your mind needs to recover. And so even though people, when you're drinking, you might say, I feel like I sleep better, right? Even when you're sleeping, your brain, unfortunately, is not getting the appropriate sleep that it needs to restore itself, right? And so that's not getting that REM sleep. And that is so critical for emotional processing and mental health. Right? A lot of times people don't recognize that, even without alcohol, right? Let's say there was no drinking. I'm going to pause on the alcohol for a second just to jump on this sleep bandwagon for kids, for adults. How important to have enough hours of sleep in the night, because that in and of itself, we could do another webinar just about how sleep impacts mental health, but it's so, so important because that helps with emotional processing, right? I'm kind of going off on a little tangent, but a lot of times people don't recognize that not having enough sleep in children or adults can make it look like and make you feel like you have ADHD, right? Because you're not able to focus. Your ability to sustain attention and concentration is deeply affected when you don't have good sleep, right? So you can see with alcohol use, now I'm going to go back to that, right? It significantly reduces the REM sleep. So you're really not getting that sleep that restores all that, right? And using alcohol, when you're drinking alcohol and using that to go to sleep, your body is waking up during the night frequently, even though you don't feel like you are, right? Even though you don't say, "Oh, I woke up like 5 times last night," because you can remember when you do, right? But when you're intoxicated and you fall asleep, you are waking up in the night. You just probably don't really remember it, right? So overall, you're getting a poor quality of sleep, waking up feeling tired, foggy, unrefreshed, right? And not getting, those deeper stages. Um, so ultimately, what happens is it can cause mood swings, increased irritability, right? Again, a more difficult time managing stress. And also, it really, really, because that emotional regulation, that part of sleep that helps with your emotional regulation, it will increase the vulnerability to depression and anxiety, right? Because if the brain is not getting what it needs to rest and regulate emotions, it's going to increase depression and anxiety, right? Making it harder for you to adapt or cope to stressful, sad situations, right? Situations that might be overwhelming. In life, we can't escape that. You need a little bit of anxiety. A little bit of anxiety gets you out of bed. A little bit of anxiety gets you to brush your teeth, right? Because you're a little bit worried about your breath, or it gets you to take a shower. So anxiety is helpful, right? But when it becomes where it's not paralyzes you, or where it's kind of conflicting, causing conflict in your life and making it where you can't do what you need to do, that's where anxiety kind of gets out of the way, right? And of course, in life, we can't escape sadness. We can't escape being sad or having a little bit of depression, right? But when the depression is increased to where it really impacts all the different areas of your life, that is when it becomes a major problem, right? And so without that good sleep, right, it will definitely increase your vulnerability to having more and more depression, more anxiety, right? So a lot of times people, again, will say, "Hey, it helps," right? I'm just having a few drinks here or there, a couple times a week, or just at night. It's a sleep aid, right? But just remember that that will actually interfere with healthy sleep and make not just your sleep worse, but your mental health worse as well. So, okay. Now, moving on to co-occurring disorders, right? A lot of times, and that is just exactly what we're talking about, right? Many individuals that are struggling with alcohol, they also experience co-occurring mental health disorders. And so that is different things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, whatever it may be. But for us, myself, and at Desert Recovery Centers, we see alcohol use as a symptom of a mental health disorder or as people using it to cope with, right? And maybe they don't have a mental health disorder, but it's to help cope with the stress, the trauma, the emotional pain. And those are mental health symptoms, right? And so instead of finding or being able to learn ways to deal with the stress, the trauma, the emotional pain, people are reaching for a drink, right? Something that's very simple and easy and has an immediate, right? You don't really have to do anything. You just make the drink, drink it. Go to the bar, order it. And it's there. Even in that first drink, you can feel that wave of just relaxation, the wave of your brain kind of just slowing down a little bit, right? So what begins as self-medication can evolve into physical and a chemical dependence, right? Where the body, again, just relies on alcohol to feel normal. And so it's so, so very important. This is one of the cornerstones of Desert Recovery Centers and the way that I believe, as well as all the other psychologists in our team, of treating it together, right? Both conditions together is essential because mental health symptoms drive alcohol use and vice versa. Alcohol use can drive or exacerbate mental health symptoms. So you can't treat one without the other, right? So a lot of times, people can go to places and say, oh, well, I have a drinking problem. I just drink too much. I get drunk, I blacked out, all these DUIs, yada, yada, yada. And they go to a place and it's just substance use treatment. A lot of times, for some people, they can find success. For myself and how I understand it, I truly believe that treating both conditions together is so essential, right, for your mental health and so essential for long-term recovery, right? Because in understanding how it works, right? This cycle, right? And what it's helping, right? What is alcohol helping with? Well, the anxiety, depression. I can't sleep. So what if we just separated the two? If I could just help you with your anxiety and your depression and your sleep, it would seem, right, that bridge that now I don't really need the alcohol to help with that. Now I've developed a dependency on that. And then how do we disconnect that, right? So that it can really translate to long-term recovery. So, moving into recovery and mental health improvement, right? So, when alcohol, and that's what I'm saying, separating them and trying to see, right? So, when alcohol use is reduced, eliminated, many people will say, not in the beginning, not in the first day, not in withdrawal, not in detox, but after that, you'll experience a significant improvement in mental health. So I'm always very honest, right? It's a hard journey when you stop drinking. So you're not going to feel better the first hour. You're not going to feel better the first day. I'm going to be very, very honest with that, right? But as the days and weeks, as your body starts to reacclimate, you'll readjust or recalibrate so that it's not looking for that dopamine hit. It's not looking for the alcohol. Your mood will often stabilize, right? Feelings of irritability, sadness, hopeless, they will decrease. They're not going to disappear, right? Because now those were always there, right? The alcohol was helping them to kind of drown them out. And so when you remove the alcohol, it just helps so that they're not increasing, right? They'll be going back to kind of real baseline before the alcohol. And so that will definitely help, right? The improved emotional functioning overall. The anxiety will lessen, right? And that will make kind of facing the day, facing the stressors of life from hour to hour, day to day, a little bit easier to manage, right? Your sleep will improve. And we talked about how the REM sleep is affected, how that deeper sleep is affected. And so if your sleep quality improves, immediately it's going to give you a little bit more cognitive clarity. When your sleep quality improves, it's going to immediately just overall help your functioning in attention, being able to focus, being able to make better decisions, right? Your brain and your body are going to begin to recover, right? And then when it's recovering, you're going to create this space to be able to learn healthier coping skills, right? You're going to have the ability to really just hone in on that and say, hey, what can I do? What can I learn to help with my depression? To help manage those negative thoughts, right? How to manage the anxiety, manage those racing thoughts, those catastrophic thoughts like, I can't do this, life is going to be over, I'm going to die, this is going to happen to my family, all those different things, right? And of course, insomnia. So I think, earlier when I was talking about how alcohol affects dopamine, right? That brief spike in the brain, how the brain is always going to be looking for that dopamine hit. Um, we want to, in recovery, right, in professional treatment with therapy and support, you will find ways to increase dopamine naturally, right? And so when you increase things naturally in your body, right, it's more sustainable and there's more of a long term where your body can be like, oh, okay, I don't need to reach for this immediate dopamine spike, right? So different things like exercise, having more social connection, building those relationships, achieving goals, small goals, big goals, whatever they may be, having routine. Um, that can definitely scientifically proven, evidence-based to increase dopamine gradually and that your body can sustain that, right? Creative work, reaching painting, coloring, drawing, building something, right? Even just repairing something in your home or being able to say, hey, I had this goal and I finished that. That is an increase in dopamine naturally, right? And so then your brain and your body aren't going to have that crash because the alcohol, you can never keep it up here, right? Always, there's that crash that comes down with long-term chemical imbalance, right? And so when you learn coping skills, learn ways to really increase the dopamine gradually and have it sustain in your body naturally, you won't have that chemical imbalance, right? So it's something that natural dopamine can be earned and is sustainable. So it really builds, and I just want to reiterate that again, real satisfaction in your day-to-day life without those crashes. And then, of course, when you're able to stop drinking, right, we cut out the alcohol, then now we can really, start looking at symptoms, right? Looking at triggers, looking at the emotional patterns that really cause an individual to say, "Hey, that drink, what did it help me with? Where do I get triggered? What thoughts do I come into my mind and kind of make me go, I can't do it. I have to do this. I have to drink or this, what functions, what parties, what family members, what places that I go to really trigger me to want to have a drink, right? And why does it trigger me to want to have a drink? What am I trying to relieve? And so by not having that, we can start developing and gaining insight, building strategies for long term, right? For your long term mental health. So it's not just about stopping the alcohol. You want to restore your emotional balance, right? Improve your mental health, your well being, creating sustainable coping strategies overall. Um, and so at DRC, at Desert Recovery Centers, when we're talking about how do we retrain your brain, your body, right? How do we recover from the disruptions that I just spoke about, right? Disruptions with the GABA, right? Disruption with your glutamate and your serotonin. How can we regain the natural emotional cognitive balance? And that's really the most important thing because you can't take away a coping mechanism and not replace it with something, right? Of course, we don't want to replace it with something else that can negatively impact your body. I'm talking about replacing it with things like evidence-based therapy, right? CBT skills, CBT groups that help you manage your anxiety, improve focus, regulate mood without relying on alcohol, without relying on, an outside substance, right? Individualized therapy. That really helps because when you're able to sit with somebody, right, an expert that can help you identify your triggers, build your own personalized tools. And then, of course, I always believe that in mental health improvement, in recovery, psychoeducation is so very important. So this is kind of like psychoed, right? Just providing a little bit of information so that you can start to identify, like, is that me? Is that somebody I know? Is that what's happening to my loved one, right, with their alcohol use? But it really gives you the ability to kind of learn more about it, gain a little insight, maybe motivation, self-awareness. So that's psychoed, right? So the individual therapy, the group therapy, the psychoeducation, because the goal is to restore, right? Natural calming mechanisms, improve cognitive clarity, stabilize your mood, and then just really build sustainable emotional regulation skills. And of course, I'm always wanting to be very transparent, very clear that, building those emotional regulation skills are not going to happen overnight. They are not going to happen in a day, not even in a week, right? It's something that's going to take time and a lot of practice, right? So if we think in real life, right? And we are in real life, but I always say that in real life, if you wanted to be a mechanic, if you were learning to be the best chef, right? If you're learning to, fly a drone, well, that takes a long time for me. So some people can learn that in an hour. So that's not a good example. But, any skill, degree, it doesn't happen overnight, right? And so emotional regulation skills, they're not going to happen overnight, but they have a better chance of happening much quicker when we're not using alcohol, right? When our mind is a little bit more clear. Um, so you definitely want to be able to have the professional treatment and therapy to support that. So, I don't know if there's any questions about that, but I just wanted to share a little bit about desert recovery centers, right? And how I know and I believe that we are the gold standard of care, right? We combine mental health treatment with substance use. And we are, in fact, we are a mental health primary facility. And what that means is that we see everything through a mental health lens, right? That means we use clinical evidence-based, very things that have been tried, researched on, clinically rigorous approaches. And so the truth is that you have to focus on stabilizing mental health first, right? So that you can then treat the substance use. That I truly believe, and all the other psychologists that work with us and the other therapists, our BHTs, from top down, we know that that is the foundation for long-term recovery, right? So at Desert Recovery Centers, our program offers what I believe, and I could be wrong, but way more clinical groups, way more evidence-based clinical groups than most or probably all facilities out there, right? We have therapists, master's levels, doctoral levels, psychologists, all that providing these psychoed groups, process groups, and then, you know, the opportunity for individuals to practice those skills, right? So on top of having the individual therapy sessions, right? 2 to 3 sessions a week, we have also developed what we call bridge work therapy. And that's where individuals can apply what they learn in therapy in real life situations throughout the week. And so that we know that that's really helpful because that's real life practice. Um, and of course, one of the really most important things that I believe why Desert Recoveries has the gold standard of care is that our treatment program, right? And treatment for each client that comes to us is not as it just individualized, that it's developed and actively overseen by licensed psychologists like myself, right? I meet with people during the week, on the weekend, different things like that. And we are engaged daily because we want to make sure that treatment is tailored to that individual. It's clinically sound, right? That we're using evidence-based treatment and it's adapted to each person's needs, right? We believe that that integrated approach, clients will be better stabilized, more self-aware, and prepared to continue using the skills that they learn, right? Once they leave our program or when they go to the next phase of treatment. Okay, so let me see if there's any questions. So there's a question. It says, is there a way to safely drink alcohol or should I avoid it altogether? And that is a great question, right? And so, and I think earlier I kind of touched on it, is that, and let me see, how can I word this? You know, when alcohol becomes, when you're dependent on it. And what that means is that when you're looking for it more often than not, right? So a lot of times I would say, hey, there's nothing wrong with having a drink in moderation, right? There's nothing wrong in having a drink with, um, in a social activity or with your meal. No, that's completely fine, right? You don't have to avoid it completely. But there are individuals that should avoid it completely. And those are for individuals who, have discovered or know that alcohol is being used as a way to escape, right? As a way to escape the depression, the anxiety, the thoughts, the feelings, right? And so it's just like anything, right? If I get a massage to relax, I typically people don't do massages daily, right? Typically people don't do massages hourly, right? Or for hours at a time. You might do it once a week. It kind of enhances the week. That's kind of a time to relax and refresh, right? And so if you feel like when you're having that drink, it's enhancing your meal, right? People will say white wine, I think, makes fish taste better, or red wine for steak, or different things like that, right? Or a drink to relax or for socialization. That's okay. But when you start to notice that you're looking for it and you can't go without it, right? And that drink is not just to enhance the meal, it's because I'm feeling something negative and I want to get rid of that feeling, right? Immediately and over, right? So it's not just once a week. It becomes now something that's moved towards, I'm always thinking about it. A lot of times I try to tell people this, that, if you have to actively tell yourself m- multiple times, like, I'm trying to cut back, so that is a signal that you already know and are aware that it's a problem or it's an emerging problem, right? But if you can sit down and say, oh yeah, it would have been nice to have that glass of wine, it would have been nice to have that drink, but if you don't have it, you don't really think about it, and it's okay. It doesn't ruin that evening, that meal, that time, right? Or if you go to a family function or a party and it's like, yeah, I could have a drink, that's nice, right? I can have one. Um, but if you're like, hey, I can't go to that party without that drink, that's kind of a signal to kind of look at that, right? And then of course, it's hard for me to kind of cover all the different scenarios and all the different details of that. You can always reach out, right, to speak to somebody, to if you think that that is becoming a problem, um, overall. So I hope that answered your question. Let me see if there's any other questions here. So I have another question. It says, how do I know if a loved one or friend is starting to get addicted to alcohol, and how do I talk to them about it? That's a great question, right? And I think the easiest way is that with alcohol use, with drug use, and for, again, I'm going to reiterate that to me, it's a mental health condition, right? Alcohol use is, for me, that's how I see it. So even with depression or anxiety, when you start noticing that your loved one, may it be because of alcohol or anything else, that they're starting to withdraw, right? That they're starting to not be as present, more irritable. It's causing problems. And so that's one of the key factors with alcohol or drug use, is that it is causing problems for you socially. That may be, blacking out at a party or going to a bar, getting DUIs. Occupationally, it's causing where they're calling out from work, missing big, big meetings, missing big deadlines. So that's socially, occupationally, and then I know it's losing my mind. Yeah, in their relationships, right? It's causing difficulty or issues in their relationship, right? So if someone is kind of saying, hey, you know, you're drinking too much, or this happens when you're drinking, that's kind of a signal that it's causing a pervasive problem in all areas of their life, right? Not being able to get up for work. And so when you start noticing that, and that could be caused by alcohol or could be caused by depression. It can be caused by PTSD. And so I kind of want to answer that question in that way to kind of bring everything in is that when you just start seeing your loved one kind of in different areas, just things falling off, right? They're not calling back, they're not meeting up, and then, of course, the legal issues, DUIs, getting in physical altercations, not paying certain bills, different things, or missing really, really important appointments. That's when you can kind of see that it's a problem. And I know, discussing it with loved ones, it can be a pretty touchy thing. We've talked about this in another webinar. It's like how to approach somebody. Um, and that is definitely where, you know, it has to be done gently, right? You definitely don't want to just say, hey, I think you have a drinking problem. You need to go get treatment right now. I don't think anybody would do that. But that, in essence, is kind of really just confronting someone with it is not always helpful. And it's more just lending a listening ear, right? Because there's things that are happening. And you really want to use I statements, right? Like I noticed, you know, I didn't see you at the party, or I missed, or I'm really concerned, you just got a DUI, or I'm concerned the other night because you blacked out, hit your head, XYZ. And kind of leave it at that, right? Expressing how you're concerned, but not moving the next statement into, I think you need to do this, you need to go do this. And because kind of leaving an open platform to see what your partner, what your husband, your wife, your aunt, your sister, your brother are going to say after you say that, right? Because they might come back with like, oh yeah, no, it's not a big deal, and then because if they don't think it's a problem, there's nothing you can say that can get them to go to treatment, right? So just offering maybe the observation, like, hey, is there anything I can help you with? Do you want to, do you think it's becoming a problem, right? Or I don't really even know, right? Maybe we should call somebody or just maybe reach out to a professional to get a little bit more help. But the most important part is just opening the space, providing a space for your loved one to just share with you, where they can just kind of say, like, oh man, I just have to keep drinking to sleep. And I just can't keep doing this because now I wake up with a hangover and then I have to, have a drink just to get that. I think it's just, becoming a problem, right? They may not say that, but they might just state, it's just not even helping anymore. And so if you're listening to that and just being, providing this non-judgmental space and be like, yeah, that's hard. What do you think? Like, do you think we should look for something else to help you get a handle on that? Right. And that could be a way to approach as opposed to confronting them and kind of just like saying, hey, this, and this in a very cold manner. It's a little bit at a time of just opening up that conversation. I hope that makes sense. Okay, we have another question. What are good ways to manage depression that don't involve alcohol? That's a great question. There's a lot of different ways. Earlier when I was speaking about, increasing dopamine, right? There's exercising, there is, completing goals and tasks, right? A lot of times as human beings, we're naturally made to be purposeful beings, right? We want to do things, complete things. And so when we're feeling down, when we're feeling depressed, um, oftentimes with or without alcohol, we want to not we do anything. We want to isolate, we want to withdraw. And so for us as psychologists, as therapists, what we talk about is behavioral activation, right? It's doing it even if you don't feel like it, getting out to do a 10-minute walk, right? Engaging in something that, fake it till you make it kind of a thing. Like, oh, I don't want to. But in those moments when we do something that is goal focus, it can increase that reward system, right? Going for a walk, calling a friend, reaching out, reading 10 pages of a book, right? Just doing 10 jumping jacks, getting our body moving, whatever that may be. And so looking to, I think that's a very simplistic answer, but a lot of times if you're suffering from depression or anxiety, the best thing is to have a routine, right? To help prevent and to help your body and your mind be prepared for when the depression or the anxiety is increased. And so that would be, weekly or daily, doing mindfulness exercises, guided meditations, yoga, getting those 30-minute hour massages for your body to help relax, and then kind of giving you that pleasure and that reward, right? And so there's things to help manage depression and anxiety preventatively, right? And then things that you could do during when you're experiencing it and also when you're really in deep. But the ultimate goal is to get it where you're in the preventative place, right? And that's why, hey, I might be feeling good, but I still need to make sure I get my 8 hours of sleep, right? I'm not going to skip out on my meditation in the morning. I'm not going to skip out on my yoga. I'm not going to skip out on my 30-minute walk, or on my little coffee date with my friend that I'm going to get to kind of relax. I'm not going to say yes to everybody else and no to myself. I have to say yes to what I need for self care, because that self care really helps keep depression and anxiety at bay, right? And then, of course, that self care really helps you to be able to manage it when there's an increase in those symptoms. Because, I often tell people, I'm glad you're going to be faced with this anxiety provoking situation, right? I'm glad you're going to be faced with this feeling of hopelessness. And I know it kind of sounds kind of like, why would you be happy that? Because that's the time you can practice the coping skills, practice the journaling, right? Practice I'm going to go do some deep breathing right now. I'm going to go do some box breathing right now, because that will instantly, right, bring down the anxiety. Kind of increase your ability to think more clearly. Because when you could think more clearly, the negative thoughts that are perpetuating, that are kind of exacerbating the depression, this constant, I'm nothing, nobody loves me, I can't do it, I'm a failure, which is really feeding that depression, right? And the ways to slow down, like put little stops in that wheel that's going, slow down those negative thoughts. Okay, I don't think let me see if there's any other questions. All right. Well, thank you everyone today for being present for our webinar, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Right. And of course, if there's any questions, please give us a call, get on our website. And I always tell everyone I'm available for any type of consultation that's needed. If you have any questions about if you or a loved one needs to get started with any help, right? We're definitely here to help. Please just reach out. Thank you so much.